Today is May 27, 2023. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki, Naganago, Mekoche, Chase Takom Aki, or Dekots Nagotine Siku. Hi, my name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11. My name is Dekots Nogotine Siku in my language. My people wore rabbit skin, so it's been referred to the land of the hair people. And anyone who's from Calgary knows how hysterically ironic that is with all the bunnies that we are surrounded with. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is a visitor to this area of Pincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, which is an English name, which is let me say that again. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name that has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution while having a Canadian Indian Act imposed status card, which is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ2+, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. I do not speak on behalf of all Indigenous. I just share my journey as I walk down the red road. As a Dene woman who has attempted to run, join harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow for incarceration, a denial of justice, denial of health services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples, I have worked to continue reports to advocate for and attempt to work within these systems meant to harm me and my community. I think of all of this today, and I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for the so-called country named Canada. I hope you see your role in the importance of stopping harm as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Pride Month should never just be 1 month. It is important to understand the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on these lands by Christian outsiders. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, honoring the host as the guest, and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation. It's important your land acknowledgements have meaning. I encourage all people to introduce themselves with an acknowledgement of their ancestors, stories of displacement, how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement, so we as Indigenous people know how safe you are to be around. If you don't know how to pronounce your local Indigenous nations' names, won't say your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, won't acknowledge imposed economic oppression, or your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around my community, my family, and myself. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves Native Calgarians or whatever town you're from show me that you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Jesse Winty's book Unreconciled explains this perfectly, as do many Indigenous authored books. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism. But that would be part of the treaty partnership, meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. I honor the Blackfoot and the elders as they've been kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my name in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot and Dene elders, language keepers, as I try to learn proper pronunciation. I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet. North of the border are the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22nd, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Wesley, Chiniki, Bearspaw Nations of the Stoney, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit, status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching, you can afford to give. Thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com. Send in your comments or your questions. Also, giving a review helps, whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel where you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. So today I'm going solo. So what that means is that I wasn't able to get a guest, and that's okay, because the whole purpose of me really starting this podcast was to heal and to be able to speak my truth without interruption. So I wanted to bring up a few different things today. I am trying to do the whole TikTok thing, and I don't normally do that, but I wanted to give it a try. So today is the second anniversary of the 215 Voices That Spoke from the Graves. And for folks who don't know, and I just had an interview with some youth that were going to the University of Latvia. They didn't know. The rest of the world still does not know. And Canada has imposed genocide and apartheid here, and that our schools are surrounded with bodies, and we have conservative politicians trying to deny these facts, this truth. And that's why we can't have reconciliation, because we still have these folks that don't get the whole concept of everything. So I wanted to talk today as an Indigenous woman, the importance of voting. So if you've been following my last podcast, you know that I've been talking about the Alberta election in different ways. My last guest, we talked a lot about the drug crisis that we're experiencing and the very poor policies of the UCP that are still causing genocide of Indigenous people, Indian residential school survivors, and 60 Scoop survivors. So if you're not paying attention, and if you don't see your role in voting against this, this is the easiest way to show your protest to the really poor UCP policies. I mean, I could go on about all of the other shit-tastic things that they've done, from increasing our insurance, increasing our electricity bills, so many things that they've done that have done nothing but hurt Albertans. If you care about our mountains, for folks who don't know, the Niitsitapi water protectors kind of led the conversation with Corb Lund about how the UCP wanted to give an Australian mining company rights to our mountains to destroy our view, but it makes somebody in Australia really rich. So, you know, and that's something that, is it Sonia Sharp? She was in charge of all of this, and everybody seemed to be okay with that. And it is impossible for me to understand why anybody would think that's okay. So if you are Indigenous and you've been taught, you know, oh, well, that's not our nation's way. Okay, let's break this down. Our ancestors signed these treaties. I don't care how shit-tastic Canadians have been about being shitty treaty partners. We have the right to vote. We have the right to protest with that vote. And we don't have to shut down any infrastructure. We literally just have to show up the polls with some ID and vote. It's the easiest way to give the middle finger to the UCP right now. I strongly recommend going to the polls. Like, don't listen to me, just go to the polls and go vote against the UCP immediately. Go vote for the NDP. And if you absolutely can't give the NDP any votes because you've listened to many of my previous podcasts and know how shit-tastic they can be at times, you can't do it to them either. Just go vote. Just go give it a go. There's the Green Party, and you can also spoil your ballot. But here's the thing. If the UCP win, and let's say they win by 10 votes, what if your vote could have been the difference to having a non-UCP candidate? Go vote. Bloody hell, go vote. So back to my previous ones, if you are a new Canadian, I'm sure you're not listening to my podcast, but if you are, we had Simon Jamal on talking about the importance of voting, how easy it is. Many of us who are so-called Canadians, Indigenous, we would go help you. If you wanted to go vote, you ask us, we'd go help you. That's the shitty part about us. You ask us for our help, and like, you know, we'll just say yes. We'll sign treaties. We'll assume the best of you. and then you go and commit genocide and happily continue to do it. But here we are. So, listen to those other podcasts. I wanted to give an update to folks who do listen to my podcast. If you haven't heard Marilyn Northpagan's story, you probably should. That is a huge amount of discrimination that she had to face. And just yesterday, there was a CBC article, and it's called "The Former Alberta NDP Volunteer Files Human Rights Complaint Against the Party." And I shared it, and right away, white settlers were like, "Oh my God, what timing?" It's like, shut up. You don't listen to my podcast. You obviously don't know. We've been talking about the human rights violations that the NDP do. And basically, so a lot of you know, I'm the Indigenous Peoples Commission operations chair for the Liberal Party of Canada. And as a result, that's like an internal vote within ourselves that we do. Well, the NDP have some similar caucuses within themselves, and the disability chair, the former one, they're suing the NDP. So I had Colin May on talking about the discrimination he felt from the NDP. I had Marilyn Northpagan talking about it. I've talked extensively about the disability issues or ableism issues that are happening in the NDP, but I don't care. I still lent my vote to the NDP because UCP are literally let's kill all the natives. They are so happy to kill us all that, at least the NDP don't meaningfully do it. They just do it out of ignorance because the policies are already in effect and they're not interested in stopping them. But with the UCP, they want to make it more and more with their, enforced addiction beds, et cetera, et cetera. So listen to those other podcasts if you haven't already. I lent my vote to the NDP, and I encourage everybody else to. And that was something a lot of the conservatives that have actually been speaking out and endorsing for the first time the NDP, because our conservatives that we have here right now are just right-wing Nazis. They're just fanatical. It's incredible. So I wanted to give people, you're actually not going to believe this. So if you go on to Elections Alberta, you'll see all the registered parties. The Advantage Party of Alberta, the Alberta Liberal Party, which I ran last election, but that's a whole other story for another day. NDP, the Alberta Party, Communist Party, Green Party, pretty okay. Although I can't really vouch for the Advantage Party. I don't know anything about them. The Pro-Life Alberta Political Association. So for folks who don't know, a lot of people don't know this, but the Pro-Life Party, they literally just use it as a funneling money in order to promote their pro-life agenda. So a lot of people have been talking about how do we declassify them as a political party when they're really only fundraising for that, and why they just don't go through their stupid churches. I have no idea. Reform Party of Alberta still exists, not on all 87 ridings. The Solidarity Movement of Alberta is the Nazi one. So Artur Pawlowski is a fellow who plotted against killing RCMP here in Alberta at the Coutts border. If anybody else was plotting to kill RCMP, we would, if not be murdered by the police immediately, we would be thrown indefinitely in jail. But if you're a white pastor in Alberta, you are not only not murdered, you are not only not really persecuted, but you have the Premier of Alberta saying, "Oh my God, I'm your biggest fan," and fangirling you. So last week was a whole shitstorm. Artur Pawlowski did this it was basically a campaign speech, but he tried to throw the Premier under the bus. The Premier has absolutely been going, head over backwards for anything for this man. She's actually been found in violation by the Ethics Commissioner over this issue. But nobody will do anything. So in the last election, the guy I ran against, his office was raided by the RCMP the Friday before the election, and he won by a landslide. Like if you add up the NDP, the Liberals, the Greens, he's still won by a landslide, like no question. So in Alberta, everybody is perfectly okay with you breaking the law. Like nobody is held accountable for nothing here. And that was in relation to the leadership of Jason Kenney, which he's not even premier, so nobody cares, right? So like nobody cares about the law here in Alberta. And that's what, like earlier on TikTok, people were like, oh, I'm Two-Spirit, I'd like to come to Alberta. I'm like, time out, don't go, because this place, like you can get murdered, nobody's gonna give a flying crap. I can conspire to kill police and everybody's cool with it as long as it's on what they deem the right side of the law. Like you can't even with these people. So anyway, they're running. They have their whole Nazi party here called the Solidarity Movement of Alberta. I actually was driving today and I seen some signs for them and I was like, there's no way this can be authorized by Elections Alberta. So I popped on their website. Sure enough, they're on here. The Buffalo Party of Alberta. Oh my God, that sounds so Indigenous. They are so anti-Indigenous. So we have the Reform Party, the Pro-Life, the Solidarity Movement, Buffalo Party, and the UCP. We already are at 5 Nazi parties here in Alberta that you can split the vote for. The Independence Party of Alberta, because, you know, we can't work together with Artur Pawlowski or other folks. Then we have the UCP, and then we have the Wild Rose Independence Party. So like, look at all these insane right-wing groups we have. And everybody's like, it's fine, it's Alberta, it's cool. That's where we are as a province, and everybody's okay with it. And you know what's upsetting to me is the amount of progressives that I get from out east. I'll block them in a second, even if they're on my team, because they're like, well, what do you expect? It's Alberta. I'm sorry. What kind of, like, when you put in that perspective of being a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation, we have a genocide against Indigenous people, and you have the audacity to say that to a Native woman, you're no ally or progressive to me. You're out of here in my life. Holy. So lend the vote. To me, lending the vote to the NDP was just a simple decision to do, because it's a middle finger to all of these right-wing fanatical folks that I can't even believe have registered party status, but here we are. Something I did not expect to talk about all week. I think I had at least 6-7 interviews over, you're not gonna believe this, fireworks. So, as I said, today is the 2nd anniversary of the 215 bodies being rediscovered at Kamloops. Well, when that happened, all of the flags across Canada went to half-mast for a year. And all the Conservatives in Alberta were mad at the Prime Minister for having the audacity to recognize this as part of the TRC. You know, I know a lot of people hate Justin Trudeau. I get it. I wish he would do more quicker too. But we're talking about 150 years of colonialism. You can't undo it just like that. They are literally working on the systemic racism and systemic barriers within this colonial system and not being recognized for it, 1. And then 2, all of the oppositions are not doing more, except Leah Gazin. Credit to her. For folks who don't know who she is, she's an NDP. Prior to being an NDP MP, she was a human rights defender. You know, she's always defended Indigenous people. So other than her, like, you know, folks are working on it, but it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff to undo. And PP, our opposition fellow, like, what a train wreck this guy is. Not only is he an Indian residential school denier, but he also welcomed the convoy with coffee and donuts and supported them through the whole thing, just like Danielle Smith. And so these people are like nothing but Nazis. They are targeting the LGBTQ2+ community, the Indigenous community, folks with addiction, houselessness. Like, they do not care if we just all die. That's what they want, actually. So they're like for genocide. So anyway, back to the stupid fireworks conversation. When the 215 were rediscovered and shouted from beyond the grave, like, all the natives were like, can we please not have fireworks for Canada Day? Can we cancel Canada Day? Whatever. They had Canada Day 2 years in a row already. And now we're like, Calgary, the city of Calgary put out a press release saying, hey, we're going to cancel the fireworks and have a pyrotechnics display. And all the right-wing folks lost their crap and are like, woke culture, cancel culture. Like, if you're actually Indigenous, you were on the receiving end of endless streams of hate comments. And conversely, as an Indigenous person, I was completely confused. I'm like, they even said to respect the Chinese culture and to respect the Indigenous community. And I'm like, well, can you follow up a little more on how that's a thing? And apparently they had no talking points for that. They just threw us under the bus as a scapegoat as to why it is that they were canceling the fireworks. So some alt-right wing group, I'm sure associated with 4 or 5 of these Nazi groups I just mentioned in the Elections Alberta parties, they put out a petition saying, hey, I'll reinstate fireworks. So of course they did. And of course the city councilors were like, absolutely, we want to do that. So they did. And the fireworks are reinstated. And, you know, I was really angry that they were okay with having Canada Day after the 215. You know, I was mad. I felt gaslit then, frankly, because there's a whole volume about missing children and unmarked graves that's been released since 2015. And miraculously, because nobody's read the TRC, they just conveniently didn't know until that happened 2 years ago today. And I'm still angry. I'm still mad. I'm still gaslit about that. I don't know if I'll ever forgive Canada over it, frankly, because they just ignored our voices for all those decades leading up to this moment. You know, I'm live right now on TikTok, and a good friend of mine, Josh, you know, he says the hate comments to natives on this app was horrendous. Every post, even if it's just beating. Like, I don't think I can really communicate to non-Indigenous people how much hate we get every single day, and yet none of your laws protect us. None of them. So I'm bringing it up because you've seen it in the stupid fireworks conversation and all the comments. Then, and for folks who are Indigenous, this is a big trigger warning. This week, they shut down McLeod Trail for one of the morning commutes. At 3 a.m, a white man had murdered in the park one of our Indigenous men, and stabbed him to death. And there's no hate charges. Why would a white homeless fellow stab to death a sleeping Indigenous man in a park? So for non-Indigenous, I really want you to sit with that and see how, if you're quick to say that's not a hate crime, you are ignoring land theft, your treaty partnership, reconciliation, houselessness. You're ignoring all of that. You're ignoring the power dynamics of race in this country. This isn't for you, frankly, this podcast, because you're not open to understanding this. You don't want to. You want to be comfy, cozy in your home, listening to podcasts, thinking you're doing your anti-racism work by listening. It's bullshit. You guys need to start holding these cops, your city councilors, to account. And if you can't over stupid fireworks, no wonder it's perfectly okay for a white man to come and murder us in a park, and you stand idly by and do fucking nothing. So, you know, the police, they reached out to me a couple of weeks ago for the Moose Hide campaign, and they asked me to talk about it. So I did. And they've used those pictures to talk about how they're doing outreach to the community. And what's interesting about that is that they still don't know about the Moose Hide campaign. They're still not charging this white man for hate charges against this Indigenous man that he murdered. You know, like, they're still not implementing the 231 calls to justice or the 94 calls to action. So, like, what is it going to take for Canadians to get this? That there would be any doubt you have to vote against the UCP in this moment shows to me a lack of understanding of your privilege in this world. I wanted to let folks know, I don't know who it was who did the paperwork for the Calgary Award, but thank you. I really appreciate being nominated for that. I see that my friend Deb Green was also nominated. So for folks who don't know who she is, her sister was a Starlight Tour out here in Calgary and was murdered not too far from where I live, actually. But this was years ago, before the development out to Chestermere, and her body was found right outside of town here, and the police had left her. So Tsuut'ina chief at the time, Lee Crowchild, he was doing a memorial rock in front of the Great Eagle Casino, and it looks like a bench. It's gorgeous, and I was lucky enough to be there for that presentation of that rock as a tribute to missing and murdered Indigenous women, specifically Lainey, her sister. And it's important to bring all of this up because I have yet to see the police apologize for their involvement. And frankly, like not that long ago, they just murdered Sonny Crazy Bull at the Marlborough C train station. I know that they have a whole list of new MMIW that it will get released. But the point is that they don't see it. And Canadians, for that matter, don't see it. Settler Calgarians don't see it. And it just breaks my heart because I'm watching genocide. We had a overdose awareness program put together by one of my Indigenous sisters here in the area, just this amazing artist. And she should be nominated for a Calgary Award too. And, she brought in this white guy who was from Forest Lawn. He was houseless and in extreme addiction for the last 15 years. For the last 3 years, he's been sober. So he's been talking about opioids and the drug crisis in Forest Lawn, and it was a great presentation. And unfortunately, I had to leave early because USA was done their movie, so I had to go pick up my daughter. Anyway, really enjoyed that. But it's hard for me because when I was running way back in 2015 municipally, I was talking about the drug poisoning crisis then and talking about harm reduction then. And only now in 2023 are we going to finally have conversations about safe supply and harm reduction. And it makes me sick to my stomach because we've watched so many of our brothers and sisters die. And Calgarians are okay with it. They're okay with this genocide, and they're okay with continuing it under a UCP government. And they talk about economics. They say, oh, we have to vote UCP out of economics. It costs less to do harm reduction. It's economically smarter to do harm reduction techniques. It is economically smarter. So if you only care about money because you're a fucking worthless soul eating person, then you should be for harm reduction for no other reason than it's cheaper than the status quo. But here we are, and whatever, drink your beer, have your cocaine, and everybody's happy, right? Holy. So anyway, Calgary Awards, thank you to whoever nominated me. Obviously, one thing Deb and I agreed on is that we have to nominate more of our youth because all the youth that were nominated were non-Indigenous. There is a Crowchild Award for Indigenous people, and I've never been nominated for that, that's for sure. But that's usually where we put our efforts. But as Indigenous people, I'm asking you to really look at the Calgary Awards and just start putting in Indigenous names that that we should be acknowledging. And speaking of Indigenous, I every time I tell people this, they go, oh my God, I didn't know this. Katie Lang's mom is a Bibi. So she's originally from Kainai. So she's like the two-spirit, really. And I've always looked up to her. I didn't know she was Native until like way later, but she was just unapologetically herself and a lesbian, and people overlooked that until she became a vegan. And then Alberta was like, hate. Anyway, our favorite two-spirit from Alberta, she is getting a Governor General Award and looked fabulous all in white with her Buddhist garb. So just love her. I will always love her, always look up to her. And hats off to you. You deserve the world, Katie Lang. And I know you're an international celebrity that lives right here in Calgary. And I know you don't listen to my podcast, but I adore you. So I'm just going to quickly read through some comments that are coming in. Are the young Indigenous teen found under some wood crates, cups? Doesn't look criminal, really. Yeah, so it came out in BC that there was one of our young women that was found. And again, cops, you know, oh, it's not criminal. Yes, it fucking is criminal, but the cops are not doing their job when it comes to Indigenous people. They will not protect us. They're happy with genocide. This is so sad. You are right. It will get worse if the UCP with Take Back Alberta racists get in. 100%. They ignore it. Let's be real. 100%. Alberta will be a mini Florida if the UCP. It already is, Alberta mama. Quite frankly, it's worse. And our premier has come out and said that she adores Ron DeSantis. So, you know, we already have a Nazi in Florida. We have Nazis here, and they're just Naziing together. Two-Spirit, Katie Lang. Yes, we all love her. So thanks, folks, for taking the time to post, because, you know, it's good that we're all on the same page. That's for sure. So for folks who are like, okay, Michelle, that's some heavy shit. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I talk about this all the time. And people are like, oh my God, I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't know. Oh, wake up, folks. So solutions. So I've ran a book club since 2016, monthly one. It's the second Monday of each month. Right now in June 12th, we're going to be doing Five Little Indians by Michelle Good. I'm almost done it. And it's a really good book for folks to understand the gravity and trauma of Indian residential schools, the aftermath. And I highly recommend it. Oh, I want to give a quick shout out to the folks who are doing that Killer Under the, I don't know, Wildflower Moon or something. I have the book. Anyway, it's a major movie. Like Martin Scorsese, he directed it. Leonardo DiCaprio, Brendan Fraser, like all these Hollywood celebrities are in it. It's a really sad story. It's a true story. It's a fictional story, but based on what actually happened. So anyway, I wish you all knew how exciting it was for me to see that kind of representation. Our people were like sharing Facebook pictures and stuff that had happened in Paris and Cannes Film Festival. And, you know, for the newer generations, you have no idea what it's like to never have any representation and then have some. So I just wanted to give a shout out because, you know, the Five Little Indians book by Michelle Good, I heard that that's going to become a movie. And I heard that, you know, like this movie that's coming out is finally starting to tell some truth about North America. So I'm hoping that people will understand the gravity of what we mean by stolen lands. I think they do. I just don't think they care, bottom line. July, we're doing pages 219 to 349 of the final report of the MMIW. August 14th is Our Voice of Fire by Brandy Morin. September 11th, will be the 113 Pathways to Justice, which is the government of Alberta's look at the MMIW report. Might be an interesting conversation based off of the change in government if the NDP get in, if folks go vote NDP. October 9th, Cree lawyer Harold Johnson's book of Peace and Order. And then November, we're going to do the Guide of Implementation of the National Action Plan on Violence Against Women and Gender-Based Violence, because, you know, we'll have read the MMIW report, we'll have seen the government's, so, you know, incorporating that as well. And then in December 11th, we'll be making space for Indigenous feminism, edited by Joyce Green. And then lastly, for solutions, we have the Reconciliation Action Group. So if you're in Calgary, you can join us and do some actual work as opposed to, oh my God, I so know and love natives and I can't wait to buy their beaded stuff. I don't fucking care. I care that you give us equal opportunities. I care that you implement 94 calls to action. I care that you're working on 231 calls to justice. And if you're not doing those things, you are wasting your breath with me, my friend. So if you're not in Calgary, go to the reconciliation committee that you have. If there's not one, you better make one, because I don't want to hear, well, there's not one. I'm like, oh, you were able to type. That means you can make one. Do the work. Holy. We aren't safe anywhere, sadly. Exactly. Thank you, Shay. That's coming in from TikTok. So I'm proud that this podcast has given solutions, cultural safety training, cultural first aid in all of them to create a safer space for Indigenous people of color and those with disabilities and 2S LGBTQ to speak. Authors Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin of heretohelp.bc.ca has a whole piece on what is Indigenous cultural safety and why you should care about it. Their work are cultural action tools, so please support Indigenous work like that as part of your reconciliation work and settler understanding. I'm just lucky enough to repeat and highlight it here. Internalized racism and lateral violence is another form of violence Indigenous and marginalized equity-seeking groups experience by the structure of oppression imposed on these lands. So if you go to racialequitytools.org, first of all, donate if you can, but also they have tons of resource files. And Donna Bevins wrote up a great piece about what is internalized racism. And I encourage anybody from an equity-seeking group to really focus on that, so that we don't project that onto each other, because every effort it takes to attack each other is less effort going towards tackling white supremacy. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee. So afsc.org. They have great information on what to do if you see racism happening. Anyone who follows me on social media wishes they would watch the anti-racism organizational lead for the city of Calgary. He gave a great presentation from the ARAC committee on the journey of becoming an anti-racism leader. So if you're, not a QT BIPOC and you're like, I want to be a better ally, then you better watch that. Indigenous people have been talking about our issues, sharing our reports and trauma in reports, commissions, public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians and policies and their platforms if they don't recognize equity-seeking groups in their budgets with Gender Equity Plus, if they're cutting violence prevention programs, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities. Know that your vote to that party directly negatively impacts equity-seeking people. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports on child welfare reform, violence prevention, and now 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. Provincially in Alberta, the Kenney government created 113 pathways to justice. So all you blue voters should be holding your blue MLAs to account on it. Follow the Premier's Council on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and see what they're doing. We'll see on Tuesday who won and if that will even matter, because so far that new Premier's Council did fucking shit. Municipally in Calgary, we have the White Goose Flying Report. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in the justice, educational, government, health institutions, with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms and politicians if they don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, sexism. They literally have zero business running. Should be understood by all parties, local sports clubs, everything. Google articles on how non-Indigenous Canadians can become allies, because there's multiple ones out there. Actually, I just talked to Stephanie Harp. We had an emergency podcast around Christmas time to talk about some of the crises that we're facing. That's why I was so mad at the whole fireworks conversation, because here you had the city of Calgary ripping the doors off of bus shelters so that if our people didn't freeze to death, they lost their limbs. And they're talking about canceling fireworks. Fuck. These people need to pull their heads out of their asses. Anyway, we put out a statement. I put a letter out to all the city councilors, and none of them replied except the mayor. And I asked my listeners and everyone to demand an urgent action to protect the lives of Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit, and gender diverse experiencing homelessness, which you could find at womenshomelessness.ca. And nobody replied to me. So you want to talk about fireworks? I want to talk about our people not being housed and freezing to death and having addiction issues. So, they have done nothing for us. That said, there's two people I know that are employed by the city of Calgary who I do love, who I know face a stupid amount of racism within that stupid structure. And they are doing the Indian Residential School permanent memorial outreach. So go to the city for that if you want to know about that. Drug crisis, obviously, you and I talked about it in our last podcast, and it's like astronomical the amount of cost this is. So for a bunch of stupid folks who think they're so brilliantly conservative, they sure make stupid fiscal decisions, and frankly, moral and ethical ones that are killing people left, right, and center. For folks who want workers, you think you'd want to save them by not killing them, but here we are, vote fucking UCP, right? Yeah. Anyway, if you are using substances, please don't use alone. If you are using alone, you can contact the National Overdose Response Service at 888-688-NORS for support, or you can download the Brave Indoors app. Lifeguard is another one that you can utilize. Drug poisoning that's happening in Alberta is ridiculous. If you are experiencing emotional distress after anything we talked about today and want to talk, call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 855-242-3310. It is toll-free, open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can also go to helpforwellness.ca, and they have a little text box there too. If more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. Again, toll-free 24/7 crisis line. If you're non-Indigenous, there are usually distress center lines in your area and a functioning 211, or you can call 833-456-4566 or text at 45645. And you can also go to crisisservicescanada.ca for even more. For 60 Scoop folks here in Alberta, you can go to ssisa.ca. Indian Residential School Survivors and Family Hotline at 866-925-4419. Kids Help Phone 1-800-668-6868. And the Native Youth Crisis Hotline is 877-209-1266. The following are two LGBTQ2S crisis supports. If you go to lifevoice.ca, you will find tons of different supports, but the Trans Lifeline is 877-330-6366, and the Trevor Project 866-844-7386. I'm just going to say this. There's been a war on the LGBTQ2+. We are seeing an uptick in suicide and suicide attempts. Put these numbers by your goddamn phones. Put it by your alcohol. Get rid of your alcohol. Like, that's what makes us make stupid decisions. And fuck Ron DeSantis and the Premier, Danielle Smith, the MLAs that support her, because they are allowing this Nazism against the LGBTQ2+ community. And I'm going to give a quick shout out to Jeremy Farkas, which I unblocked him over this. I unblocked him. I knew he identified as part of the queer community a long time ago when we were running. And he's a hard conservative. He was a part of Manning's group. He was an executive director. So I hate him because I know he's been a part of this machine of hate that's been going. So anyway, he's on the CBC. for the second time. Last week made a lot of international news and national news because here he was saying, you know, Danielle Smith's a little bit shit crazy. And everybody was like, what? Even Jeremy Farkas said that? And I'm like, whatever. So, but this Friday, so today's Saturday, yesterday, he said on the CBC that he shared a really personal story that you can find on the CBC Eye Opener. And he talked about how he knew he was bisexual and he confided in what was his best friend. And overnight, his best friend became his abuser, his bully, and he started thinking about suicide. And somebody seen him in the library and intervened. And that's what stopped him from committing suicide. And I say it because it was important that he said it. What he actually said that made me like him, well, unblock him, was that he regrets not bringing it up more when he was running for mayor, because now all of this Nazi hate rhetoric against the queer community is happening. And one of the MLAs here in Alberta, candidates, I should say, said that, and for folks who are LGBTQ2+, no, I unequivocally wish I could punch her in the face for saying this. She said that being queer is like being dog shit or feces. And she thought it was hysterical, and they laughed about it on a stupid podcast a year or something ago. And Jeremy said that if he would have heard somebody in a position of power say something like that he very well could have committed suicide. So for folks who are queer, we as fucking adults see how bad the rhetoric is against you. And it's wrong. This is what Nazis are. This is why I'm so openly calling them Nazis. Nazis targeted the LGBTQ2+ community, the race-based ones, which they do against Indigenous, but Canadians are so fucking oblivious to. You know, we see what they're doing. It's wrong. And you do not deserve this. And I hate that you're hearing any of that transphobic, homophobic rhetoric. And just know how much I love you. And my daughter is identifying in that community. I have friends in that community. I know Josh, who's typing right now. You know, all of this is happening. And it's not fair to you growing up in a place that you know people hate you. It's not okay. And I want you to know, for as many people that are bigots saying these things, that first of all, online, it's mainly trolls. These are people who are heartless, soulless people, in some cases paid to say these things by these conservative right-wing folks. But in real life, if you can turn that off, know in real life, there's a whole community that loves you and supports you and surrounds you with love and courage. And if you reach out to the queer community, we are here for you. I'm straight and I'm cis, but I consider myself part of the community when it comes to the, bricks being thrown at you. I want to take that brick, not you, because you have enough bricks that you have to deal with. So from the bottom of my heart, know that we love you. You deserve better. You don't deserve to hear this hate. And these resources are available for you if you're feeling really low. I hate you have to deal with this. Some of the comments that I'm seeing is, there's nothing worse than feeling unwanted. We want you. And this is coming from folks who identify in that community. I have made arrangements for my kids to get out of Alberta if the UCP get in because they are queer. My friend Josh, thank you. I think about how I would take it as hard as a Native gay kid, adult me. I protect you too, spirit. And yeah, I feel you, Josh. I feel all of you. So I just, not a fan of Jeremy Farkas because he didn't stand up for the queer community anytime sooner. And only now that the bricks are being thrown does he seem to care. And regardless, at least he said, the UCP are a train wreck now 2 weeks in a row. And I'll tell you one other thing he did that I thought was really great. He said this. So Nahid Nenshi, he never endorses a candidate, which broke my heart when I ran for Ward 10 because he was in Ward 10. But regardless, he never endorses anyone. But this week he endorsed the NDP because, you know, a bad NDP government is still better than the UCP. And that was his reasoning. And Jeremy Farkas, he wouldn't endorse the NDP publicly on the air, but what he did say, which I thought was really strategically clever of him to do as another poly person, he said to the Conservatives, remember that your vote doesn't have to be told. Secrecy of your vote is important. So I felt like he underhandedly said, you can vote NDP and tell everybody you vote Conservative. But truthfully, your ballot is between you and the ballot. It's not public, which is a valid point. So if you're on the fence, I implore you, you know, you are lending your vote to the LGBTQ2+ by voting NDP. And because right now they're full out being attacked by the UCP, as are Indigenous people. So please consider lending your vote, as many prominent Conservatives have asked other Conservatives to do. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. This is self-care, how I take my power back. That's why I started the podcast. We have no representation. Speak freely without interruption, without tone police, leadership shaming, gaslighting questions. Because many people don't want to hear Indigenous opinions, but sure want to tell us theirs, even if they know nothing about us, know nothing about colonialism, the constant surveillance of our people, protests, vigils, and rights. I and many others share microaggressions daily, so it's unacceptable. Learn about being trauma-informed. People like me are dealing with internalized racism and gatekeeping, folks that survive off the status quo. Good example of that is what happened in Cold Lake. I wasn't going to get much into it, but since we're talking about, you know, status quo, my friends on TikTok have watched this whole fiasco happen as well with basically one of our Indigenous women from the States came up and was being sexually harassed by a white producer. And immediately Cold Lake Nation put out a statement basically saying, it's okay, we like the money. And then the guy who brought him up was like, put out a video that he later took down saying, you know, that did not back this woman who was saying this was not right. And yeah, so a lot of us don't follow him anymore. And I see one of my friends say, well, he really did put out a good apology after talking to another Indigenous woman, but it's too late for me. He's gonna have to prove himself for a long time and have a long record. And in my heart, I will always think, you motherfucker had the audacity not to support our sister when you brought her up into this unsafe environment. And after everything, you still don't get it. But you know what? That's Alberta men for you. I know a couple of good ones, but there's not many. They will be perfectly okay with violence against women, violence against Indigenous people, violence against Indigenous women, and they will do anything for a buck. That's Alberta. That is the truth. That's gatekeeping us, and I'm tired of it. So, you know, these are people who are still in their trauma. They stop people from doing the good work, deplete personal resources. So internal and external racism is an everyday reality for me and many folks in equity seeking groups. I always talk about, you know, the structure of racism, the individual racism, and then the internalized racism. So I wake up in the morning and I get 3 levels of racism by fucking existing. Anyway, it's not just me. Oh my God, it looks so good. Great setup. Thanks. So a good friend of mine from out in Toronto who has talked a lot about conversion therapy is on my TikTok. And that was his great thing that he had to say. I see a few other ones of folks. I'm really happy to. A vote for a con is a vote against yourself in human rights and dignity. Yep. And then a little bit about the guy we were talking about. So anyway, Masicho to my ancestors. So for folks that don't know, I just recently lost my grandfather and my granny. And up to this point, I've always talked about them in every one of my podcasts. And now she's in the spirit world, literally smudging her back to me. So to my granny and to my mom, what strength looks like through your example. Thank you, Masicho. To my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt. My stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family. A huge thank you to my husband, Darcy, Big Buffalo Rock Man. You know, he produces and edits the show. He's my husband, my childhood friend, father of our child, and he has supported me every way in my journey of the Red Road. He has witnessed decades of sexism and racism. And to our child, Thunderpipe Necklace Woman, we are blessed to learn from you daily. We are so honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. And I hope my family will be proud in the future of us discussing these present day issues in a way that they can understand. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com. Tell me about your voting experience. God, I want to tell you about my elections Alberta experiences, but God, we're already here. I have a YouTube channel. You can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. Thank you so much for folks who've always shown your love and your donations for that matter too. And I want to end by giving side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not Tradish. And my beautiful cousin would respond, or you'd be in my dish. Thanks folks for listening. I hope you tune back.